Well, it is good to be back with you. Well, Hank Johnson has shared with us what it means to be proximate to our neighbors that we already know and be willing to help one another in our family and friend circles. What about people who don't feel like they have anyone they can trust with their kids when a life event arises? When we thought about that question, we thought of my friend Jill Landers. Jill has a passion for vulnerable families, and her time as a social worker in the emergency room at Harrisburg Hospital allows her to use her heart and mind to help our region. But that's not all. Jill is also an enthusiastic volunteer family coach with a local ministry called Safe Families for Children, which is what we want to discuss with Jill today. Safe Families is having a profound impact on our region, though most haven't heard of it. Today, we hope to help change that. In 2019, I can't talk today. In 2019, it seems like so long ago. I was just joking with my kids. I want to erase the year 2019, but it has given us good things too. Like this stat. In 2019, Safe Families Ministry locally here in South Central PA hosted 208 kids in homes around our region, making it the second highest user of Safe Families in the country, only behind Chattanooga, Tennessee. And it is just so awesome to see how families have opened up their homes to kids in need, kids and families who are experiencing a life event. So thanks for joining us, Jill. It's good to see you in such a formal atmosphere. We've been longtime friends, and it's cool that you could join us on the podcast. Thanks so much.
Glad to be here. Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. So as Ryan was saying, not a lot of people know what Safe Families is. So could you explain to us what Safe Families is and why it's important in this, crisis that we're trying to address?
Sure. So when I meet with churches or groups or whatever to kind of talk about Safe Families, I say to them, one of the questions that I oftentimes like to ask is, if you had some sort of emergency, whether it was you lost your housing in a fire, you had a medical emergency, something came up where all of a sudden you weren't able to provide the care for your kids that they need, who would you call or reach out to, or who could help you in that situation temporarily to care for your kids if you had no other options? And most of us would say like a sister or brother, a neighbor, another family member, a coworker if you had to. Like we have people we could draw from in emergency situations. Safe Families is especially in existence for those families that just have no answer to that question. They literally have no one they can reach out to, whether it's their family support is maxed out or there is no family support. They just don't have anyone that they can trust or don't have any resources or support. So Safe Families for Children is a resource that provides temporary care for kids in a time of crisis. So it's a short-term need. When we have referrals come in, we screen them by saying it needs to be a temporary need. They need to be appropriately caring for their kids. So they're not families that are in need of foster care because they're not caring appropriately or there's not abuse or neglect. And it's a temporary need. So what we do is we have families that are willingly and voluntarily hosting those children for a temporary time. So it could be anywhere from a couple days up to about 60 days is usually the maximum, but sometimes it ends up being longer than that. And it's a voluntary hosting. So the relationship between the families is unique because the placing parents have a voluntary agreement with Safe Families and the hosting family that they're going to give temporary custody to this family to care for their children while they can't. So.
Yeah, that's great. So I just want to emphasize something you said there, that it's a question I get a lot of what's the difference between Safe Families and foster care, and you articulated it really well. But just to repeat for our listeners, our viewers, however you're engaging with us, foster care is court order removal where kids have been removed because they're deemed to be unsafe, or Safe Families is for active participatory parents who just need some help for a temporary basis, but they're not unsafe. These are active parents.
That's correct.
And so I know you said that already, but I think it is different and it does change the dynamics between, instead of us being antagonistic, not antagonistic, that's not at all what I mean. Instead of being a line of defense between a bio family and kids, like you've been in foster care, right? You've been appointed by the courts to be caretakers of this child in lieu of parents. This is in partnership with a family.
Yes.
Safe Families is in partnership with a family.
Yeah.
And our goal and our privilege is to come alongside those families.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's really a unique relationship.
Yeah.
That's
Great.
one awesome benefit and blessing of Safe Families.
My wife and I, as Jill knows, are a host family with Safe Families for Children. And we have been so impressed that 96% of kids in our area never enter foster care because of this program. Where about probably 80% of those kids would likely, absent this kind of intervention, eventually get in because the situation like precipitates and one thing leads to another. So 96% of kids never enter foster care, which is just great.
Yeah.
And so we're really thankful for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an astounding stat. It really is.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, and the more families that we can get involved, the closer to 100% we get that, and even the more kids we get within that 96%. So our next question is, what does your work with Safe Families as a family coach look like, and how does that intersect with your work at the hospital?
Sure. So I have a couple different roles through Safe Families, all volunteer, just because I love and am passionate about the ministry of Safe Families. I love it. So one thing I help out with a lot is like the outreach piece of it, meeting with different churches and groups to kind of get the word out. I think a lot of people have never even heard of Safe Families. And when they hear about it, they get excited and interested in how they can partner with preventing this need for foster care. These are children that do not need to be in the foster care system, but for whatever unique need, there's really no other option. So by Safe Families stepping in, we can prevent that, like we talked about. So I do a lot of outreach in that way, connecting with potential host families and stuff like that. My role as a family coach is as a support to the host families, particularly when they have a hosting. So when they have kids in their home for whatever reason it is, for whatever length of time, I go in, I do visits with the family, with the kids, just make sure that they have what they need to support the children and participate in the hosting. Sometimes I help, and I've helped with you guys in the past, where there's just a unique relationship between the families, the placing parent and the host parent. And sometimes the host family needs a little bit of guidance in walking through how to navigate that relationship, whether it's seeing things in the placing parent that's different from the way that the host family would parent, or just navigating the dynamics of that relationship. So it's basically just a support so that the host family does not feel alone, because they're not, and just kind of walking alongside them as they take the role of caring for the child. We're there as, just a support and whatever. So that's my role with Safe Families in a volunteer capacity. At the hospital, I'm a social worker in the emergency room in the ICU in a city hospital in Harrisburg. So the patients that are coming into our hospital a lot of times are coming in with a lack of social support and resources just because of the demographic that tends to come to our hospital. So I've seen a number of situations where families could have benefited from Safe Families, did benefit from Safe Families, just showing evidence of what that need looks like within that demographic. A lot of those situations have to do with emergency medical situations. So many of our hostings, when my husband and I were a host family, many of those situations were like an emergency medical, like a surgery or something was unexpected, and they just literally had no one to care for their children in that emergency situation. Or like one of them, the dad had just started a new job, really needed that job. The mom was hospitalized needing a surgery, and so the kids just needed a temporary place until mom was recovered and had her surgery. So that's one example. Another one just recently that came up is just a mom who happened to come in. She had a couple of kids that needed to be seen for different things, but the medical staff recognized that she was definitely at the end of her rope, just with trying to work, being a single mom, having like 6 kids. There was just some stuff going on in her life, and she was so overwhelmed. And she was like asking for help, like, help. My family has said they're maxed out because they can't help. They're working and they're whatever. And she just had nothing. And she was like crying. And the nurses were like, social worker Jill, could you like help in this situation? Because I don't know what to do. And when I went in to meet with this mom, actually, she had been a placing parent through Safe Families before, which was really remarkable. And I was like, hey, I know Nikki who's in charge of this. How about I reach out to her and see if we could get you a temporary hosting, like just for a week or two to get you, back on your feet. And she was so thankful. We were able to work with her. I'm texting Nikki like, hey, what can we do? She was actually able to reach out to the families that had hosted the kids before. I'm not sure that we were able to host all of the kids, but a couple of them. And so even that just gave her, because they were little and she was just overwhelmed, and having to care for little tiny kids when you're totally overwhelmed can be a challenge, even when you're not overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So we were able to just help her out with that. And that was such a relief for her. So I could see that situation, potentially leading to just a situation where the mom is like throwing her hands up and even getting into, even a more high risk situation. But because she was literally asking for help and support, we were able to provide that support before it got to that situation where, something like foster care would need to become an option for her.
Yeah.
So, and the other thing, forgot about too, one huge need that we were seeing, especially a couple years ago, my friend who's a maternity social worker at the hospital, she was seeing more and more moms who were coming in either in labor or for planned C-sections, and they would have like 1 or 2 kids with them that would literally come to like labor and delivery with the mom who's in labor or whatever. And we're not allowed to have other children. The patient is not allowed to be a caregiver for a child while they're at the hospital. That's just not wise because they're receiving medical care. So the children are not allowed to be there without another parent caring for them. And so in these situations, our maternity social worker was like, I don't know what to do. Like, we were breaking rules. Because you can't just, like, what do you do with these kids? Yeah. And the other option is to place them in foster care. If you have no one to care for the children and there's no safe place for them to go, then your only option is foster care. But the sad thing about that is that when these families who simply were giving birth and only needed a temporary place for their kids to go, they would have to place their children in foster care. And then you have to create a whole plan and goals and everything. And instead of having their children temporarily somewhere for, 3 or 4 days while they give birth and whatever, they were having to go into foster care for 6 months, a year, whatever, meet all these different goals, even though the family was like appropriately parenting. They just literally needed a place for their kids to go for a couple days. So we were able to work with Safe Families and connect with Safe Families and really make this a priority for some of the hosting families. So the cool thing about this is that, like, usually, when the family's going to give birth within a few weeks or whatever. So we were able to get host families on board that would say, okay, can you be available in the next, month, give or take. We're not exactly sure when or whether it's a planned C-section. Can you host this 1, 2, 3 kids for, 3, 4 days while mom's in the hospital, maybe while she's recovering from C-section? And then the kids just go back with mom. And so we're totally avoiding foster care or any of that that's not needed to just have these temporary hostings through Safe Families. So, and then the benefit of that is that the families could potentially create a relationship that, creates another level of support for the family that's coming in and giving birth, and just create some more relationships and, potentially.
Yeah. And I love that because I love that example, and I've seen that play out in our family's life too, and some of the hostings we've done. And I just love the simple idea of a family in crisis or some kind of life event and is asking for help.
Yes.
And then what a joy and privilege it is we get to come in and help meet that need, not only for that mom or their dad, or, we hosted a great grandma once, and like just raising her great grandkids, and just these situations where so many times we can look from afar and say like, wow, like how did that happen? Where this was like, oh wow, there's a vulnerable family, we can step in, and in the best case scenario is I have nothing to do, right? That we have so many families who are willing to just pitch in and help. And I actually think that that's a mark of Christians, that we should be ready to help our neighbors and even make ourselves available. And oh wow, there's so many families that we don't have to do that.
That would be wonderful.
That's where we hope to get someday, with more than enough, in this idea of having more than enough families ready to step in.
Yeah, and it comes back to what Hank was talking about earlier about proximity and neighboring, and just an ethic of that. If we're living by that in our tight-knit communities, then hopefully we won't have, mothers who are going to the hospital and having to make that hard choice. But thankfully there are people like you doing your job that can just jump in and help anyway.
Yeah.
But hopefully, like even outside of that, we can create tight-knit communities that can prevent that in the first place. Because that's just I didn't know about that until recently, and I'm sure our listeners, like, that's a new thing to them as well.
And one totally unique thing to Safe Families, like you were talking about before, the different dynamic between foster families and host families through Safe Families, is this unique relationship that they oftentimes get to have. Not every time. It just depends. Each situation is different. But there's the opportunity for this really positive, cool relationship, because these are families asking for help and you're a family providing that temporary help. And so because of this voluntary whatever agreement that they are saying, we are in such a desperate situation that we need your help, you have the opportunity to like create this cool thing. And one of my favorite things when we were hosting is like the realization that as a mom, this is just a fellow mom. This is just another mom whose situation happens to be different from mine. That really, if things had happened differently, I could have easily been that mom. Yeah. And so there was like this mom to mom connection that's just like these moms that want to care for their kids, but can't right this second. Yeah. And then me as a mom saying like, we have this kindred heart because we're moms and we love our kids. And that really allowed a lot of the situations where we had hostings, or even as I watch other host families, you have the opportunity to create this really unique relationship that's like a friendship, like a family. The first hosting that we had, the mom actually said to us, like, you are more like a family than any family that I've ever had. And we didn't really do that much, which was really sad, but it was also really amazing that we got to develop that friendship and relationship. And we still have a relationship with them. So that's one thing I really love about Safe Families.
Yeah, that's great. And my wife and I have had the same, and getting to know some of the families. And like you said, some to put our watchers, listeners at ease, like not every instance is like this, but sometimes it's always a beautiful thing when it happens, that we have these ongoing relationships. We've been to birthday parties. We've, had them over for fun. We've had them over for pizza. Like it does develop, and it does come back to what Hank talked about. If we're willing to be proximate and open to meeting the needs of our neighbors, what about the people who have no one? And even if they have someone, maybe that someone can't help right now. And now they find themselves with no one. Like if you have a life group, if you have a friend circle, I mean, Katie and I regularly say, that's my wife, we regularly say, wow, think about all the people we have in our life who we could trust with our kids. Yeah. How, can we just be even one more person for these families to be? Yeah. It's a joyous thing. Not without trial, but it's a joyous thing. And we have gotten to see firsthand how it's not only helped these families, but it's also helped our kids. I know it wasn't on our list, but could you just touch briefly on how it's helped you and your family have a bigger heart for others, because you're bringing in people into your home that are not used to being there, which is different than like your life group at church or your neighbors' kids. And yeah.
And I just want to go back to what you said a little bit, because this is a super humbling situation. I feel like as a host family, to know that there is a family that's so desperate that they're willing to place their child with a family they don't know and have never met. Again, I think that just,
takes a lot of courage.
It really does. It really does.
Totally does.
And so I feel like, again, that was another connection and relationship mom to mom, was to be like, you're trusting me with your kids and you don't even know me, but you're so desperate that please let me serve you, So it's a lot about humility when you're doing this, which teaches you. It's not always easy. And I think, like you said, for our boys, I have 3 boys that are now, I don't know, 13, 11, and 8, but they were a lot younger when we hosted more often. And I think for them, it was just similar to what Hank was talking about. It's that proximity that, like, within Mechanicsburg, we have plenty of diversity. We have lots of, whatever. But these particular situations, my children aren't necessarily coming into contact with children that are in this kind of desperate situation or whatever. And so it was even just exposure for them to kids that are different from them. There were a lot of teaching opportunities to just say like, yeah, there are people around us that are, living very close to us that are in this type of situation. And for our kids to see, a lot of kids, the parenting is somewhat different, we're all different as parents anyway. But so we had different rules for different kids in our home. And so for our kids to learn like, yeah, they don't have to have what we're having for dinner because they're not used to eating blah, blah, blah. Or, and so for our kids to be sharing their toys, sharing their home, having different rules and dealing with that. Just really, I think, widen their perspective, open their eyes to differences, to, just all different needs around them, and really allowed them to be exposed to things that they wouldn't normally have been exposed to. And I was really surprised. I mean, it's not easy to bring in different kids and have to give a lot of attention to kids that aren't yours or that you don't know, getting to know them, getting to know their routines. And I just felt like my kids surprised me every time in a way, even the ones that are a little bit more self-focused sometimes. We all have those children.
Yep.
I am sometimes that child.
Yes, me too. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness, me too. And to just see their little hearts like get bigger and bigger. And I think, Ryan, you've said that you've seen this, I've had conversations with you and Katie just about the way that their hearts just kind of grow, and to see them becoming more generous and serving is just really remarkable and amazing, and not something they would have had the opportunity to do before. So, it's really neat.
It is amazing. And even just through our kids at the beginning of the year, when they do the who are you and tell us about yourself, 2 of our kids introduce themselves as Safe Families for Children hosts. Is how
part of your
one
identity.
of their facts that they kind of listed for themselves. And it was so interesting to think about that. And in the past, when they've done that or talked about that, like, hey, we have a hosting this week. And teachers then say like, what's that? And then now teachers are aware, and their classmates are aware. And it becomes this thing that wow, I didn't realize there was a need for that. That's step 1. And then 2, like, how could I be part of that too? It's they're little ambassadors for
they
Safe
really
Families.
are. And actually, Kenton's been in class with your daughter, and he talks about how she talks about another host family
so
we have.
Funny. So funny.
It's really cool
it's so
for them
funny
to
how
be
it happens.
sharing that together. Yeah,
it's good. And I just want to tell a personal confession, and then we've got a couple more questions for you. But about perspective, and you mentioned our kids and growing their hearts. Like I myself, I was sharing with Nate in pre-production meetings about this. Like I myself it was just a couple weeks ago, we had a hosting, and I was really eager. The start of the NFL season, like I've been looking forward to it, and we weren't expecting to have kids that weekend, and there was a family that had a need, and we were able to meet that need. And at first I was like, wow, but I just wanted to watch some football this weekend and start a college football in the NFL. And I was so excited about it. And then I was sitting there helping, host these kids and playing games, and there was no time for football. And I was like, wow, this thing, like, I don't even know these teams. I don't root for them. Like that I wanted to watch these teams I don't really care about. Or I get to spend my weekend investing in kids who are going through a really hard circumstance, and I get to play a small role in being a firm foundation for them. Like in the midst of their storm, that I can, and my wife and I and our kids can be a quiet, safe place for them to be and process being in a completely different environment and going through a really hard thing. Like, what better way to spend a weekend? Yeah, and so, but it does take getting involved for those things. And even though we've done it a lot of times, doing it every time, you have to die to self. And actually that's what Christ calls us to, right? Like sanctification does involve sacrifice. Yep. And I think that too often we talk about whether we're called to do this or not do it. Yeah. And actually we're all called to care for vulnerable children. Yep. It's now, what are we going to do in obedience to that call? Yep. Not like, am I going to do it or I'm not going to do it, but how am I going to do it is the right question. And I think Safe Families has been a great way for our family to engage in this foster care crisis and help our kids grow, and my wife and I grow in sanctification. Yeah.
And I think in what you were saying, the thing that initially led my husband and I to become involved with Safe Families was because we had just moved from a small little ranch house in Harrisburg to this big, gorgeous house that we felt so blessed. Like, we don't even know how we ended up there. But, and so to think about like stewardship and just knowing that God literally provided this home for us, we felt very strongly like, how can we give back to the Lord what he's, blessed us with. And so just like you said, it doesn't take much.
Right.
I mean, it does take a lot, but it doesn't take much at the same time. Like, you had that open day to watch, football, and they just so desperately needed just this time of yours,
right.
or whether it's literally just a shelter, a home. A lot of these families, like, I just want to share one more. Can I share one more story?
Yeah.
Just 'cause it's
Do it.
like,
Over here.
the one family we had many years ago had lost their housing, and they were getting a new home. They were getting a new rental or whatever, but there literally was a time that, was right in the middle where they had no place to live, and there wasn't shelter space, or I can't remember. So the mom and dad were living in their car and sleeping in their car, but obviously you can't do that with children. That's a choice you can make as a parent, but that's not appropriate for kids. And so they chose to do a hosting through Safe Families for their kids. Meanwhile, they continued to sleep in their car until the house was ready. And so just for me to think about the sacrifice they were making as parents, like, we're willing to do what we have to do, but we know we need better for our kids. So for me to know, like, they just literally needed the shelter of my home, and I have plenty of room, I have more rooms than we would ever need. So just that whole idea of stewardship and how can we have so much more than so many people, even if we don't feel like it. So to be able to do that, and even our kids, like, they know they have a zillion toys that they do not need. And so it's really fun even to just send some home with the kids, like they love these Matchbox cards. They hold on to them like, great, let's send them with them. We don't need a gazillion. I'm always ready to get rid of Matchbox cars. But anyway, yeah. So,
well, and one little note on that, and then we do need to keep going, it is I think a lot of times people opt out as they think about their own family size and rooms and, how does it all work? Yeah. If you're leaning in and you're curious, opt in and figure out, how could you be a resource to Safe Families? Because there's other ways to serve as well. And even there's other arrangements and kid scenarios that you could be a host family. So don't opt out if you feel like God's urging you in listening to this to lean in. And we had to wrestle that because we have a 3-bedroom house, but it's amazing. Like, our kids love to do sleepovers together when we're doing hostings, and we are just really creative in how to use the space that we have with our 3 kids, and God has allowed us to do that. And so if you're thinking about this at all, I'd encourage you to lean in, and it'll be a great adventure. So yeah, Nate, you got another question for Jill?
So it's actually kind of connecting to where you were just leading us into. What does it look like for our listeners to step into this? And what does the training look like? And just that process in general.
Sure. There's so many different roles within Safe Families, which is another thing that I love, is even if you're not called to be a host family, there's so many different ways that you can support the ministry of Safe Families. But if you were interested in becoming a host family, there is a process that is, I would say, similar to what you do with foster care, but it's actually a lot more minimum, whatever the word is, less.
Yeah.
So there is still like an application process. They obviously want to screen these families and make sure that you're going to be an appropriate parent for them.
Right.
So there is an application, there is some references, some clearances, that sort of thing. And there is some training that you do, but it's not to the same extent as fostering, as you would need to go through that process. So they do like a home safety check, stuff like that. But there's a lot more of a communication and flexibility, I would say, a little bit more in kind of how that whole process works. So I don't know, did that answer the question?
It did.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. And then for people that are wanting to serve, there's multiple different roles. Like, there's an official family friend, which is somebody that goes through a little bit of a similar process of, approval or whatever, and just can help in different ways. But there's so many informal ways, even things like transportation. Some of our kids have to get to daycare or have to get to school. We can work with the school, stuff like that. But sometimes in that interim, or whether it's daycare, just even somebody that can drive the kids, if you're a host family, but you're working, or, you have appointments or whatever. Sometimes if you're just the family that can just get them to daycare one day or a couple days a week or whatever, there's things like, because it is a voluntary program, you're not getting paid or reimbursed to host the kids. So, things with like helping out with diapers or formula or just supporting. Sometimes these kids don't come in with a ton of clothes or resources. So, I have 3 boys, so, I have some stuff kept, but when I would get a girl, which I love because I love having girls in my home, but you quick send a message out to some of your friends that have daughters like, I need a 2T bathing suit because we're going swimming today,
Yeah.
So even just to be the person that's like, oh, absolutely. I can bring you dinner for this day when you're doing this transition of getting these new kids in your home or, there's just so many ways if you're not called to be a host family that you can help support other families.
Great.
So, yeah.
That's great.
And where can our listeners find out more about those opportunities? Is that through Safe Family's website?
So in terms of becoming a host family, it's definitely through the Safe Families website. But in terms
which
of...
we'll put in the show notes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
But in terms of supporting those host families, I know that West Shore has done a great job of helping host families who are stepping forward through West Shore to create kind of these support groups and support networks, which is really the ideal way that Safe Families works. We like to work within a church and then helping the host family to make sure that they have a big group of support around them so that they're not hosting alone. Because it's hard enough to like bring new kids in your home, get to know them, care for them. And you don't have to be the one that's also doing this, this, and this. When you have just people that can come around you, oh, yeah, sure, I'll drop this off, or just so that you can really focus on caring for the kids, which is a huge help. So I know at West Shore that you guys have made that a priority, which is great. So that is a more of an informal thing. There's not like necessarily through Safe Families a process to become just a supportive person. But I think that you guys do have a little bit more of a formal process to help that make sure that you have support groups for your families. We do. And then if you're interested, to be a family friend or through Safe Families, we'll put a link in the show notes to that you can find out more about what a Safe Family friend is. But it does come back to what we talked about earlier with Hank of just being aware and even asking around in your church or your community, like who is doing this and how can we help? How can my wife and I were just talking to somebody yesterday who was just like, oh, I heard that you need more families in Dillsburg. Like we'd love to be on a sport team. Yeah. And they just want to help their neighbors. And so they don't even have a relationship to those people, but they just want to help. Yeah. And so we do screen them because we want to provide these foster families and host families with safe, reliable people. Sure. But if you're inclined to do that, just be aware. And I'm a big fan of just asking the Lord, like, hey, help me love my neighbor today. Yeah. And just open my eyes to see how you could use me today and be open to that and not have this necessarily have to have this well-scripted plan. Like, Lord, I just want to use my house. Absolutely. I just want to use the things that you've given me. I want to use my life for your glory. And then if you have that posture, God will lead you and provide opportunities for you to use that for His glory and our gain. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the last thing is how many families do you think it takes to meet the need? Like how many are there in our area, and then how many more would be needed, do you think, to meet the need? Yeah. So right now in the Harrisburg area, we have 40 host families. Some of them have, we've had some changes and COVID has kind of changed that dynamic and everything. Yep. So we have about 40 active host families right now. They don't all host all the time. There's some that are like super active and host several times a year. There's some that just step in every now and then when they can, which is great. Yeah. I was talking with Nikki, who is the outreach coordinator for the Harrisburg area, and she said if we could get to 100 families, 100 host families in this area, we could really meet the need for the hostings that come through. We have so many hostings that they come through and we get the referral and it's like, yeah, they're totally appropriate. This would be a great hosting, but we don't have a host family that can do it right now, or for whatever reason, somebody can't step forward right now. If we had 100 families, we could meet those needs and, with a lot more margin for the existing host families. Yeah. That would really, really be optimal. Yeah, I just did some preliminary research, nothing technical, just looking at the emails that we get, and there are about 50 kids that went unfulfilled as hosting just since January of this year. So as we're recording in September, so January through September, it's really amazing that these are families, like you said, who humbly are saying like, I need help. And then
we have not been able to meet the needs of the people who have asked for help, when this is something, as you're saying, that people could do and just don't know about. And we are so grateful to you for helping us understand this, and our listeners and viewers to understand this more, because this is something we can do. And as we think about our name for this whole thing, possible and likely, it is possible that absent these interventions like Safe Families for Children, and even likely that these kids will continue to be in a vulnerable place, right? That like it's often, we say sometimes, police officers have told me that by the time people in a desperate place call your church, it's often too late. That they had to work up so much courage to call and ask for help. And so when people do call and say to Safe Families, like, I need help, it's often very, very vulnerable. And if we don't meet that need, it often and likely trails down, and we get to do that. And what's possible and likely if we step in is that it's possible that we could be not just meeting this immediate need, but help this mom or this dad, affirming them like, hey, you're doing such a great job. Like, thank you. This takes so much courage.
Absolutely.
And we give so much lip service to people who ask for help. Like, oh, that's so courageous. But if I hear their help, like, yeah, it is courageous, but it's even more courageous and more helpful if we say, like, yeah, we see you, we hear you, and we're going to respond to you. And it could likely change the trajectory of not only those kids' lives that are coming to your home, but even the moms and dads and great grandmas that have come through our home. Like, wow, like, I have somebody that I can call.
Absolutely.
And it's just
it
knowing that I have somebody I could possibly reach out to is a huge stress versus every day in and day out, feeling all alone. And so we don't just want to acknowledge that someone has asked for help and say, wow, that's so good. But we want to hear them and see them. And we want to be doers of the word, not just hearers of the word.
And I'm sure if you're like me, every time you get that email that says this hosting went unfulfilled, like, breaks my heart, because I know that's a family that has reached out, and we have to come back and say, I'm sorry, we don't have a host family now. So please become a host family if you can, because it's they just need it, and we need it. And
that would, like, the more host families we have, the more often we can say yes.
Absolutely.
The less shame that is attached to that decision for the bio families. Because then, like, I think it'll still take a lot of courage because you're coming from hard places. But if there's more of a consistency of, they helped us last time, they can help us again, or I know somebody who got help by them. And less of they didn't provide for us last time. They're much more willing, I would assume, to give their kids to that and know that it's going to be a safe place for them.
And I don't know if you said that. Well, we didn't say it today, but I know we've talked about it before. Like, a lot of our referrals actually come from children and youth.
That's right.
Because when they get notified or whatever, however they can get connected with these families, they recognize that it's not appropriate for foster care. They don't need foster care. And so a lot of times they will reach out to Safe Families and say, could we provide a hosting, because that would be more appropriate? So those are the times where it's really heartbreaking to know. I mean, we don't, as host families, we don't know where the whether it came through children and youth, but
we don't need to.
Just to know that there are some like that where children and youth is saying, please provide this way so we don't have to provide through foster care. That's the part that's like, oh, if we just had some more families, we could truly avoid that unnecessary need. Yeah,
that's good. Well, anything else you want to say? And no pressure, but anything else you want to say that you didn't say that you meant to?
No, just that I love Safe Families. I know I just get super passionate about it because I just love. I know. That's
great.
That's why you're here.
I just
we would not invite somebody who's like, I could leave it.
I love the ministry, and I love supporting the ministry, and I just love the heart behind it. So, always happy to talk about it, obviously. Well, thank you for your time. And we always do these takeaways. So, Nate, what was your takeaway from Jill? What would you say? There's lots of things Jill shared with us that have been helpful. No pressure. No, he knew it was coming.
I think the stories are what hit me the most. I think, like, just the stories of knowing, like, there are just a couple things missing in each person's, like, circumstances, that then, like, not having support and community around them leads to, a dire circumstance of, somebody later on is going to prison. Kids are going into the foster care system. Kids aren't being fed or cared for. And, like, they're just missing support. And I know for me, I take for granted the support I have in my life. Mm-hmm. And I I'm sure that's the same for some of our listeners. And so, like, I think as we've talked about stewardship a couple times in this conversation, I think knowing what we've been given and, the support we have, like, we need to be able to give that back to people who don't have that. And especially when Safe Families is such an effective solution, and it's really just perfect in being able to offer what's needed and even just a couple days away, maybe what those parents need to get to success and to get to get a solid living space, or there's so many things that can lead to. So I think just what I'm taking away is like open hands, almost, in a sense of just reflecting on what I've been given and seeing the reality of what other people go through and wanting to help.
So we'll sign you up. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Not everyone is called to be a host.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And as you get older and your life advances, but even now, just doing what you can now. And I think for me, the big takeaway is the 60 number. Yeah. It's something I have kind of abstractly understood, but knowing, because my life as a pastor and just as a neighbor, people will say to me all the time, like, man, I want to live a life of significance. And they're kind of just going through life, and they're not living meaningful lives. Like, they have all this stuff, they have jobs, they have security, but there's this void, this gap in fulfillment. And I'm not saying that Safe Families is the thing that will fill all of those voids, right?
Yeah.
But I am saying that I think God knew what he was doing when he said true and false religion is this: to look after widows and orphans in their distress. And to keep oneself pure and holy before the Lord. That's in James 1:27. And so how do we meet this need? And how do we find this fulfillment is to say yes to the things God has asked us to. And 60 is an achievable number. Oh, yeah. Like, what a great thing it would be if we had people waiting around saying, like, I wish there were more people I could help, versus the reality where we've got about 50 kids since January who were not placed because there wasn't help. The help is there, and it's possible and likely for us to have more than enough support for families who are going through a life event. And you have helped so accurately paint that picture for us. And we're really grateful, not just for your time today, but your investment in our region and our region's kids and families in such a quiet way that you have coached, I know, my wife and I and many other families in our area, and you and the entire Safe Families team will be in our prayers in the days to come. So we are so grateful for your time. And today we looked at before foster care with Hank Johnson, looking at proximity and knowing our neighbors and being aware of what they're going through and responding to that. And now we've heard from Jill and just trying to answer the question, but what if you have no one in your life to entrust with your kids? Those two interventions of seeing our neighbors and responding to things God asks us to do, and then being available to help answer that question of, hey, I want to be someone that someone can put their kids in my trust. Next episode, we're going to look at during. What happens during foster care? What is foster care? What happens during it? What are the needs right now in our region? And then also look at something called respite. So we're going to be looking at foster care and respite on our next episode. And thanks so much for listening. And I truly believe, Nate and I truly believe, that it's possible and likely that we can have more than enough of what our region needs before, during, and after to respond. Because there's a lot of challenges in this world that have no earthly solution, but the foster care crisis should not be one of them. And so we hope that you are listening and learning and waiting on the Lord and asking the question, what can I do? How should I respond to this? And we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.